So, Grandpa, how old are you in 2010?
I'm 82.
Did you think you were going to make it this long?
No, I didn't. And I was born on March the 25th in 1928 in Hampton, Virginia. In Hampton, we played neighborhood football games all year long. Football was the biggest thing in those kids' lives at that time. It was to go to Hampton High School and play football. And we left Hampton in my first year at Hampton High. My dad was the supervisor of the production kitchens in the veterans kitchen veterans facility, and he was transferred to Dayton. And we moved to Dayton in late November of 1941. And I was in the back playing basketball when somebody came in and yelled that the Japanese had bombed Pearl Harbor. Where was Pearl Harbor in those days? Who had ever heard of it? And we lived in Dayton for about 3 years. And the time that we were in Dayton, I got my interest in golf started because I caddied at the country club for 3 years. And at the end of those 3 years, we left Dayton and moved back to Virginia. In Arlington, my dad had got the job as supervisor of all of the production kitchens in the Pentagon building, which was brand new in 1943. Somewhere in my mind, the number 50,000 people were military and civilian were working in the Pentagon. And that was a 24-hour-a-day service. Yeah. And
so your father, Harry Sr., did he serve in the military before?
Yes, he served in the military in World War I, and he would been sent to France, and he was a cook in the army, and that's when he started in his career as a food person, and he did that for most of his life except in his younger days.
Were you close with him growing up?
Yes, but the closeness was terrific. But my real closeness was with my mother. She was a terrific woman, and she had been married once before and had a son that we knew about. And when we were in Dayton, her son, who was in the Navy, was stationed in Chicago, and he and his wife came to Dayton and visited us, and that was the first time that my sister and I had met him. He had grown up in California.
What was his name?
Martin Kenny.
Martin Kenny. Did Vivian live in California before?
No. She had lived in Hampton,
Mm-hmm.
and she met my father in Hampton.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, your father was a cook at the VA, and then later at the Pentagon. And then what did your mother do?
She was at home raising the family, and I had three sisters and myself, and that's a lot of work. And my oldest sister, she and I were about 18 months apart, but my second sister was 11 years younger than me, and the youngest was 5 years younger than Susie, who was her older sister. But we grew up with two sets of kids, old and young. And that's a lot of work for a mother.
How long did your dad work at the Pentagon?
From 1943 until he died in 1954. He was 60 years old when he passed away.
What did he die from?
A heart attack.
And then after, so that was 1955 or 1954. And then what did your mom do after that?
She raised the two younger daughters, and she had a couple of part-time jobs during that period of time, and she eventually moved up to New Hampshire and lived with my sister Susie and her husband and family. And she died while she was in New Hampshire. And I can't remember she may have died in 1991.
You graduated from Washington Lee High School?
In Arlington, yes.
And then what did you do after high school?
I went in the Navy.
And how long were you in the Navy for?
Just over 2 years. And I came back out of the Navy and went to work in the Pentagon building.
How'd you spend your time in the Navy?
And my only assignment in the Navy was up in Adak, Alaska, in the Aleutian Islands, and I was there for about 18 months. And during that time, I had two jobs that I never heard of. I worked in the foundry of a molder.
What does that do? Or what?
Well, you melt down steel and iron to its lifted forms, and you pour it into sand moldings that they used to make parts. And the other job I had, because in late 1946, when you had enough points, you got sent back home to be discharged. And nobody knew the day before that they're going to go home. And the sailmaker got enough points and went home, and they assigned me to the sail off, and I became a sailmaker. And I learned to operate a sewing machine and draw patterns for products that I had to make. And I made cover. First of all, I made seat covers for Jeeps, but I made gum covers for ships, compass, standing compasses, even covers for racks on the back of boats. We had boats coming in for repairs. We were a repair unit. So.
Did you know that? Did you have any idea when you went into the Navy that that'd be the kind of work that?
Absolutely not.
Did you?
I went to boot camp in Green Bay,
Wisconsin?
I guess it was Illinois, just north of Chicago. And our whole company, all of us, except 4 guys, were assigned to the Aleutian Islands, which I didn't know anything about at the time.
Can you tell me about the tattoo on your arm? I know or have you got a tattoo?
Yes.
What's it of?
A Navy anchor.
Did you get? I guess you got that in the Navy?
Yes, in Seattle when I was 19. And that's the only one. And our kids and the grandkids love it. My dad had a couple of tattoos.
Oh, what did he have tattoos of?
Oh, I don't know. He has his initials in and he had a lady on his arm, and it was never a big deal.
Yeah.
He had. There was a time in my life, and when I wore shortly sleeved dress shirts was a problem with me, but no more. I forget it's even there. But the kids and the grandkids loved it.
All right, so I guess let's talk about Bethesda Naval Hospital real quick. This was while you were still in the Navy?
Yes.
And what? So you were up in the Aleutian Islands.
It was home on leave, pending a reassignment, I had another year and a half service to complete. And I got a pain in my ankle one morning, and it got worse during the day and at night, and the next morning it was so bad that I went over to the Navy office on Constitution Avenue and to the sick bay, and they didn't know what it was, so they assigned me to Bethesda Naval Hospital in Bethesda. So I went over there, and they couldn't find out what was wrong, and the pain was transferring to other parts of my body. So they finally decided that I had rheumatoid arthritis, and they treated me with all kinds of therapy.
And you had to stay there for 6 months?
Yes, couldn't walk. Oh, eventually, it was funny when I wanted to get up and walk. Well, the only way I could walk was backwards, holding on to something. And finally it came around and I couldn't move around. But I had lost a lot of weight, about 75 pounds. My mother and dad didn't have a car, and my mother would ride 3 buses from Arlington into Washington to Maryland and out to Bethesda Hospital. My sister, older sister, was married on the weekends. They would bring her over. But that was not a happy experience for me or my family. And I have to tell you a funny story. Jim and Betty brought Mom and Dad to the hospital on New Year's Day. And in the hospital we had headphones for the radio. We plugged in the top of my dad, and remember that New Year's Day they had 4 major football games on the radio. That television was just coming in, and so my dad sat there with the headphones on, listening to the ball game. And I was on a ward. There were 15, 25 guys in there. And there were family that day all over the place. Dad listening to the ball game, and he didn't say much. But all of a sudden, he burled out, and you can hear him all over the building that that son of a bitch scored a touchdown. He shook up the whole ward. He never took the headset off. And but he wasn't one to sit and shit that. He wanted to listen to the ball game. And everybody knew what the score was. But one night we got to the point where I could walk. I needed a cane or something, but our ward was on a lower level with this back stairway up to the outside. And somebody suggested one night we call a cab to pick us up and take us to a bar down in Bethesda, which is 5 minutes away in those days. So we did that and it went up the back way, and the cab picked it up at the curb. Well, when it was time to go home, or back to the hospital, we called the cab, he picked us up, dropped us off, and one of the guys we had to help in, and we dropped him, he fell down a short flight of stairs. And everybody knew what had happened, and when the doctors made their rounds the next morning, they all wanted to know who the guys were that dropped their buddy. And of course, everybody said I was one of them. So that was our last sojourn into Bethesda for a beer. After 6 months, the answer was, well, you have rheumatoid arthritis and you're not fit for duty. They chit-chatted me. And that wasn't all bad. After I got out, I had problems with my feet and my arms, and I rode my sister's bicycle, and I used a tennis ball to throw against the garage with either hand. I had to do something to get my parts moving, and that's what I did. I did it with a bicycle and a tennis ball, and got through that thing.
And so then after you were discharged from Bethesda, is that when you went to go work at the Pentagon?
Yes.
And what was that like?
About as boring as anything in the world. I only lasted there for about 5 years.
What were you doing there?
I was assigned to the Office of Secretary of the Air Force in, quote, the mail room, and I became the security officer for the mail that came into the secretary's office. And
Classified.
I was the top secret control officer for classified, what was then rated classified.
How old were you when you met Alice?
Probably 24. I was 26 when we got married.
Do you remember from about the time you got out of the Navy to the time you met her, just what you used to do to occupy your time? Did you go out with friends? Just do you remember anything from your bachelor days, I guess?
Well, funny, social life was a big element then, but movies were a big element as well.
Really?
But dancing was a big thing back then. You could go to into Washington and go to a hotel that had dancing, and there were things to do. Washington was a town back then that you could go from Virginia into Washington. Traffic wasn't that bad then, but Washington had a lot to offer in different ways. And my dad had season tickets to the Redskins games, and that was a family outing. In 1944 and 45, I ushered at the Redskins team for 2 years, and that was my first opening to professional sports. But 5 years in the Pentagon, the only good thing that came out of those 5 years was I met Alice and subsequently married her about a year after I left.
Do you remember the first time that you met her?
No, it's one of those things. I saw her so many times a day. Our offices were just down the hall.
So at what point then did you know you had to ask her out?
I don't know. We went to a lot of social events at the same time. And so it got serious, I guess, when I left and went up to Buffalo. Not everybody wanted to go to Buffalo.
It's like going to the Aleutians.
Now, did you get married before you went to Buffalo?
No, I was up there for a year before we got married.
And then how'd you propose?
I don't know. It's why don't we get married? She said, okay, well, when? And it worked out. Well, we've been married 56 years. Is it 56 this year?
She mentioned earlier when she asked about you that you had a lot of girlfriends.
He did.
Yeah, yes. There were a lot of girls that worked in the Pentagon.
Mm-hmm.
So you take it advantage of things.
When you came back, were you living by yourself?
No, I lived with my mother and dad,
Mm-hmm.
and my older sister got married, and then I had my two younger sisters who were still at home.
Mm-hmm. You think you were just looking for a reason to get out of the house?
Well, yeah, everybody was glad to see me go. But no, when I left the Pentagon, I went into the selling business as a salesman. And I did that for 40 years, and I loved it.
When you first left the Pentagon, who were you selling for?
Caloric stove company, and we sold gas ranges, and that was the only product we had that that expanded over the years. But we had assigned territories, and I was on the road a lot. I always enjoyed the selling, and I made close friends with a lot of my customers. And over the years, as we moved around and had different territories, and the kids got older, I used to take Doug with me on sales calls, and that was his introduction to selling, which he made a career out of. And it's interesting that you enjoy what you're doing so much. You know your customers, your company, the industry, all of those things go to blend together to make you a better person and a better salesman.
What do you think made you a good salesman?
I think dedication to your job and your company and your customers. And one of the big parts of our job as a territory salesman was training the retail salespeople about your product and how to sell it and how to close a sales pitch. And I was pretty good with that because I related to the people, the sales people.
Let's take football. You grew up playing football year-round in Hampton. Do you think there were certain things that you learned playing football and watching football over the years that helped you professionally?
Certainly, because when you're playing football, even sandlot football, you have to rely on the other team members to get the job done. And when you translate that knowledge of teamwork, it stays with you.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And I was also a good listener. I learned somewhere along the line, if you shut up, you can speak up. But I was good with people. It's interesting that in the last few years of my career, with the introduction of computers, and I was not one acclimated to the use of computers. The best thing I could do was read it and find out how much inventory we had and what had to be sold. I probably couldn't have gotten my old job back again because of my lack of talent with computers.
What year did you retire from sales?
1993. I had that was the year that I had my stroke.
Let's go back to golf for a minute. You said you got you got introduced to golf when you were living in Dayton and caddying, and that's clearly something that's been a big part of your life ever since. What is it about golf that turns you on so much?
Well, at 82, I'm still healthy enough to play golf at least 2 days a week.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a exciting game that I've never come to master at all, and I've never had a hole-in-one, and I try every day that I play to have one. But it's a personal commitment to play as good as you can, and when it's over until you come back the next time. It's a lot of fun, and I enjoy it.
Have you been able to meet new friends out here through golf?
Oh yes, oh yes.
Or anywhere you lived, I guess.
Yes, and I played golf probably in 25 to 30 of the states in the United States, because where we went, we played golf, and it's good companionship, and I really enjoy it.
Do you think there was anything that was there an overlap between golf and your sales career? Like we were talking about football earlier.
Well, I played golf with a lot of customers over the years, and I don't think I've ever written an order on the golf course, but I have written up a lot of orders because we played golf and we had a good association with me, my company, and the customer. That's the trust that is built up between you. During the 12 years we lived in Canton, we were involved in Canton's life. We were active in the church. We were active in the political process. We were active in the service clubs, and I was active in the Junior Chamber of Commerce. And one Sunday, and the junior chamber was ultra active. We want to be involved in everything. A sports writer in a local newspaper wrote an article one Sunday about the National Football League had been founded in Canton, and it had grown, and now it was time to set up a Pro Football Hall of Fame, and it should be in Canton, Ohio. So the first thing the junior chamber got involved, we said, we'll do it. And they said, no, you can't do that. But they said, we'll get back to you. So they came back and said, okay, we'll form a committee of 6 members of the Senior Chamber of Commerce and 6 members from the Junior Chamber. And I was one of the 6 from the Junior Chamber that became a member of that original advisory committee that we stayed with it to the point that the NFL finally granted a franchise to Canton, Ohio, to build a Pro Football Hall of Fame with the stipulation we raised the money to get it done. At that point, the advisory committee was abolished, and a new committee of fundraisers took over. But we finally raised the money, got the plans drawn for the Hall of Fame, was approved by the NFL, and the thing is flourishing today.
Was it a long process trying to convince the NFL to build it in Canton?
Well, the advisory committee worked for 3.5 years. A lot of research went into this thing. We had people that went to the Baseball Hall of Fame, and they welcomed us because they knew with Hall of Fames, one would breed for the other, and the corporate people became involved. Timken Roland Bearing Company, Paul Brown of the Cleveland Browns was involved. Everything that had to be done was done. And so this is all volunteer work.
Mm-hmm. Just done out of the love of football and the desire to see the Hall of Fame. Now, what year did the Hall of Fame open?
1969 or 65.
And you were there for the opening and all of that?
Oh yes, yes. And I just this year put together all of the papers and programs that I had and sent them to your dad.
Oh, awesome.
And I've reached the point that I didn't know what to do with it. He's the avenue. Somebody can use him. And so that was my big accomplishment to have worked on the Pro Football Hall of Fame.